In this section, we will be building out a new method on our blockchain prototype called getAddressData, and we will use this method inside of our address endpoint to fetch the data for a specific address that we are searching for. So let's build out this new method now. Inside of our blockchain.js file, we are going to put a new method on our blockchain prototype. So we will say blockchain.prototype.getAddressData, which equals a function that takes in an address as a parameter. Cool. So the first thing that we want to do inside of this method is we want to get all of the transactions that are associated with this address, and we want to put them into a single array. So let's define that array now. So we will say const address transactions equals an empty array. Next, we simply want to cycle through all of the transactions inside of our blockchain, and any of them that have the recipient as this address or the sender as this address, we want to put them all into this address transactions array. So let's do that now. So the first step is we need to cycle through all of the blocks inside of our blockchain. So we will say this.chain.for each block. We want to do some functionality inside of here. So in order to access the transactions that are inside of our blockchain, we need to cycle through all of the transactions that are present on each block. So inside of this for each loop, we will make another for each loop by saying block.transactions.for each transaction. Cool. So now inside of here, we have access to every single transaction that is on our blockchain. So now we just want to test each transaction to see if the sender or the recipient matches this address. So in order to do this, we will say if transaction.sender equals the address that we have passed into this method, or if the transaction.recipient equals the address that we have passed into this method, then we simply want to do address transactions.push this transaction into that array. Cool. So at this point, we are cycling through all of the transactions inside of our blockchain. And if we come across a transaction in which the sender address or the recipient address equals the address we are looking for, then we push that transaction into our address transactions array. So after this whole for each loop has completed, we will have an array that has all of the transactions associated with this address inside of it. Cool. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to cycle through our address transactions array to figure out what the balance of this address is. So in order to do that, we will say let balance equal 0. Next, we want to cycle through all of the transactions inside of our address transactions array. So we will say address transactions dot for each transaction, and inside of here we want to say if the transaction dot recipient equals the address that we are looking for, which is this variable here. Then we want to do balance plus equal to this transaction's amount property. And then we want to say else if the transaction.sender property is equal to the address that we are searching for, we want to do balance minus equal to transaction.amount. Cool. And then finally, at the end of our method, we simply want to return an object that has the property of address transactions, which will equal our address transactions array, and it has a property of address balance, which equals our balance property. Cool. And that's it for our getAddressData method. So from top to bottom, what's happening in this method is we are taking in an address as a parameter. We are then cycling through every single transaction inside of our blockchain. And if the sender of that transaction or the recipient of that transaction is the address that we are looking for, then we are going to push that transaction into our address transactions array. So once this entire for each loop has ran, we will have an array that has all of the transactions in it that are associated with this address. After that, we are cycling through our address transactions array, and we are adding to our balance if this address was the recipient of the transaction, and we are subtracting from our balance if this address was the sender of this transaction. So after this for each loop has ran, we should have an accurate value for what the balance of this address is. And finally, we are returning an object that has all of the address transactions on it and the address balance on it. Cool. In the next video, we will be building out our getAddressAddress endpoint that will use this getAddressData method that we just created. I'll see you in the next video.